Welcome to this virtual worship service for Allen Avenue Unitarian Universalist Church, a presence for liberal religion in Portland, Maine since 1821. My name is Jane Prairie, and I'm presenting the service with help from Keith Prairie, the Reverend Raleigh Weaver of the First Church and Parish in Dedham, Massachusetts, and her wife, Jenny Carlson Petrazik. Lay-led worship is a long-standing tradition in Unitarian Universalism, and most of our services for the summer are lay-led. In the fall, our new minister, Reverend Donna Dalham, will be leading most of our services. To contribute to the offering, go to the website at A2U2.org, use the donate button at the top of the page, and choose the option Give to the Plate. Or you can send a check to the church. And finally, a reminder that we have our virtual coffee hour at 10:45 Sunday mornings during the summer, which begins with a time for sharing joys and concerns. The link for that meeting is also on the website. I look forward to seeing you then. Emotions have become the core of American identity. Almost literally, you are what you feel. Even the English language expresses this idea. We identify directly with the emotions, saying, I am angry, rather than I have anger, as they do in other languages like Spanish. In the Tibetan language, we actually say, anger is present, and do not connect the emotion with I at all. By Anyen Rinpoche, from the Four Noble Truths of Emotional Suffering. Practicing as a therapist for over 30 years, I've grown quite interested in how learning to manage emotions can be so freeing for people. And as I have also developed an interest in mindfulness, I've come to see how learning to manage emotions is truly a spiritual practice. During this service, Raleigh, Jenny, Keith, and I will be talking about emotions and our cultural tendency to judge many as negative. We explore how to become more neutral and curious about all of our emotions. In my teaching, I use a simple list of what is often called core emotions and talk about their gifts. Core emotions are a little bit like primary colors. You mix them together to create new colors. But for the purpose of this simple tool, we will be focusing on the primary core emotions. My wish for you today is that you will listen with an open heart and open mind, and that you will learn a playful tool I call hot potato rage. What comes to mind when you think of anger? Just sort of what pops, first thing that pops into your mind. Ooh, when someone's angry.
Anger scares me.
Anger to me is a secondary emotion to something else that's deeper.
I think of when I was growing up and I was angry, the thing that my parents did with that was they sent me to my room until I could be civilized. So I got a pretty strong dose of the sense of anger is not something good.
It's uncivilized.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times people will come up with the images of, oh, anger is when someone's yelling at you, or anger is, somebody threw something or slammed the door. And that it has sort of a potentially violent quality to it and scary, like you said, Jenny. And what I'm going to propose here is that that is actually something other than anger, and that anger gets a bad rap. And when we talk about the core emotions, I'll explain that more. So this thing that we're describing as sort of scary or feeling out of control or hurting people's feelings is what I call ragey. Hot potato rage is what I call it. Because when we have vulnerable emotions that we don't want to feel, we squish them in with the anger that's also a natural emotion. And then together they become this other thing. So one of them is sadness, and the gift of sadness is healing. That when we feel sad or we have sadness, often a pretty universal experience is that people get a tightness in their throat. They might even get like pain in their throat. But when you cry, you allow the sadness to come out, or you express it in some way that usually relieves that tension. So there's a physical aspect to the emotions that happens. Start down at the bottom, that love has the gift of connection and compassion. And envy and jealousy has the gift of clarifying what we wish for. Joy and pain and sadness both offer the gift of healing. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes people cry so hard they start to laugh. Or have you ever laughed so hard you started to cry? There's sort of an interesting connection there. Sometimes people have so much emotion that kind of gets blocked up that they don't want to allow their joy, so that they can't stand feeling their joy. So there are times that people block their joy too. It's kind of interesting. Loneliness is a funny one. We tend not to feel loneliness unless we're blocking our reaching out or blocked in our reaching out in some way. So loneliness is this emotion that comes up that is sort of meant to remind us to connect, to reach out, but we often are blocked by toxic shame or fear or concern about bothering people if we have other things that are upsetting us. And how we hold, if I feel like crying and I have judgment about that people are gonna judge me as weak or whatever if I'm crying, that's gonna be a barrier to reaching out. So sometimes these kind of thoughts about our emotions get in the way. So when the reaching out is blocked a little, then loneliness increases. And if we recognize that that's the purpose, it helps us remember to reach out, which can be helpful. I love guilt because it's the purpose of it is to clarify our values. It gets mixed up with shame. So I'll start with guilt. When we are breaking one of our rules or breaking one of our values, operating outside of our value system, that feeling we get of guilt is to help us stop and think, like stop and, okay, wait a minute, this is important to me. What am I doing? And I can make amends and kind of have a do-over. Keith and I do that do-over thing a lot, don't we, Keith?
Yeah.
Which is nice. But most parents are doing hot potato rage when they're tired and their kids are misbehaving about something. And so I know for me, I tend to think, well, I'm in charge of the universe. I don't know if you guys know that about me, but I'm like in charge of the universe. So if anything's going wrong, I'm breaking my rules. And so I'm going to feel guilt, but I'm also going to feel like I'm not okay. That toxic shame thing, something's bad. So if something's going awry with my kid or with Keith, I'm going to have some underlying toxic shame. And if I'm doing hot potato rage, I'm going to dump that. And they're going to feel that way. So as a child, when a parent is trying to help a kid that's doing something, we often also do the toxic shame dump. So kids, and we've all experienced it, like we feel guilty and then we feel bad, like I'm a bad person, not just, oh, I want to think about this and change my behavior. So I find that really interesting to be aware of and also to tease out. And then shame, there's healthy shame and there's toxic shame. So healthy shame has the gift of humility. It's part of how we live in community. So when we don't experience shame, we don't kind of recognize that we need to step back a little or not intrude on somebody in a certain way. Toxic shame is when we think we are bad. I'm a bad person. We usually have one or two sentences that are our go-to toxic shame messages. Fear has the gift of courage and wisdom. So if I'm feeling fear about well, I use an example for the patients that I work with, the eating disorders. They come into the program and they often are afraid of, let's say, eating butter. That would be a really common thing. Or eating a muffin, carbohydrate. And so for them, there is courage involved to follow through with this plan to eat more of these foods that they're afraid of. And part of the work is recognizing, is the fear rational or irrational? And so without sharing our fear, without acknowledging that we have fear, we can't figure that out. So if we're busy avoiding our fear, we miss out on the opportunity to have courage or wisdom. So if I was walking over a bridge on a highway and my favorite hat blew off my head into the highway, and I was thinking fearlessly, I might run into the street to try and get it. The wisdom would be, there's trucks coming fast and this may not be safe. Maybe I shouldn't go get that hat. So that's an example of that. So the gift of anger is power and strength and passion. And when in Chinese medicine, I think it's in Ayurvedic medicine too, there's this idea that the planet has certain emotions that go to certain seasons. And springtime actually has the anger energy. Mm. And it's the energy that pushes the little seedlings up through the ground or causes the buds to open on the trees. And in childbirth, often the point at which a woman is pushing a baby out, it requires a lot of anger to be successful. So all of this creativity and new life can come from anger. It's connected to anger. So I find that really interesting. So I'll get rid of this screen sharing now. And I'm just curious, as you've listened to that, what are you thinking about? And what catches your interest about emotions?
Well, for me, it gives me a lot more, I think I've ascribed some bad feelings towards some of my emotions. And so I have a lot of guilt and shame about them. And the way you've laid them out, I can see positive attributes to them a little bit more.
So it makes a little more space for exploring them maybe, or making a little more.
Yeah.
It certainly makes the ideas of all these emotions more palatable, more useful too.
You can see kind of a purpose. And that's part of
something to just avoid or put in a box, make it go away. The idea that if you actually take the lid off that box, there's actually, it's not just the thing, it's not just the anger, it's also the gifts that anger brings. It's not just the fear.
The hardest thing in separating out this process, the anger from the hot potato rage, is allowing room for the anger because it's been so scary and there's such a pattern of recognizing it as something potentially dangerous or hurtful. Or if I let this out, I'm going to make a problem. And how do I separate these things out? Blessed be. So when you think about this idea of raging, like hot potato raging, what does it look like for you, if you're willing? Like, what does your version of it look like?
Well, I go to a rage place, I would say, more often than Jenny does. I get really upset, and sometimes it makes everything kind of come together. Like I see patterns of behavior that are consistently through time, and I awfulize everything all together. And I say, sometimes I can be very defensive, but I can also say like lots of what can sound rational and probably is a little rational, but like awfulize it. I can compress it all together.
Yeah.
Very quickly. And then I also end up apologizing a lot later for my behavior and just like giving up the thing that I was upset about, even if it was righteous, because I'm so embarrassed by the way I behaved.
That's a really nice awareness too, that this can help with over time, because it's like an undoing, and then you end up back in the same place. Like, how do I hold steady? Because part of the anger is about boundary setting, or trying to grow together in a relationship. Like, I need to have anger sometimes, but how can I do that without hurting somebody? Yeah. And that's the part about world peace that this project is for me. Like, if everyone could learn how to separate their vulnerable emotions from the anger mess of it, then we could communicate more effectively. Like, if everyone sort of did it at the same time, it's sort of like letting go of nuclear weapons. Everyone has to do it at the same time. It's like interesting.
I don't think of myself as expressing. I mean, hot potato rage is a new concept to me.
Yeah.
But I don't like. I think Riley and I express ourselves, our emotions, really differently.
And that's part of the thing that I love to sort of tease out, because there's the obvious ragey behavior, and then there's these other ways that a lot of us do things. Like, have you ever been talking to somebody and they're smiling, but there's something about it that just feels like, what's happening here? And sometimes people will not make eye contact, or there's loud cooking. Like, the dishes are going, it's like, everything okay in there? I'm fine. Yeah. So there's this silent rage. There's a lot of different ways that kind of thing can show up.
If your definition of hot potato rage as sort of anger being conflated with one of the more vulnerable emotions, and then sort of becoming something new, when that happens for me, my expression is withdrawal. I go, I disappear inside, and I'm here on the outside, and it's taken everything I've got to stay here on the outside, but I am remote.
Yeah, so it's an interesting tool to begin to play around with, like how that and identifying, like, at what point does identifying hot potato rage, how is it helpful? Like, it's to recognize when you're doing it, so that becomes a way to de-escalate your own responses. And it can be interesting to this part about whatever emotion it is that we're avoiding, what the vulnerable thing. So the gift of anger is power and strength, and all the other emotions are vulnerable. So it makes sense to kind of want to take the vulnerable thing and package it up with the strong thing.
Sure.
And so we can usually tease out what is the vulnerable emotion by how that hot potato rage is. So for example, if I'm feeling hurt, I'm going to do a hot potato rage that is tossing hurt at other people. So you're going to experience hurt. But if I'm feeling fear, but not feeling fear, and avoiding fear and then tossing fear, then I'm going to rage in a scary way. People are going to be scared in my ragey energy.
Interesting.
Or for me, my toxic shame, because I'm not doing the world right yet, like So constantly a layer of toxic shame is being addressed internally. I will tend to be shaming, like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Like, have you, that kind of energy, because I'm trying to manage all this, like not quite doing it right yet, because things aren't, look at COVID. I'm truly failing.
Seriously, you are, Jane. That's why we brought you here.
You got to straighten me out.
Exactly. This is an intervention. I don't know what you thought it was, but it's an intervention.
Yeah, I think every time I teach it, I'm learning something new. But the last thing I like to teach is this tool to help sort it out. So if I'm in the middle of my reactive place and I'm feeling rationally justified in the moment, it's pretty hard to do it in that space. That's usually the over the top place. But if I back away from it just a little, I can use this tool to figure out what the heck is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always going to be because some vulnerable emotion is being not wanted by me. So I'm not making space for it. So the way to figure out what it is to make space for all the emotions.
Sure.
Okay. So so we had this broken hammock. It was something the girls had played with for a long time when they were little. And it ripped. It was up at the lake and it ripped. And I had some upholstery fabric last summer that was left over, and I decided I was going to fix it. And I was a little concerned because there was a little like broken part in one of the wooden bars, and I thought maybe this isn't going to work. And I asked Jenny about it, and she also was like, no, I think it'll be fine. And so I finished the hammock, and as I'm walking out, Jenny's mom, Jenny, and the neighbor all said to me, I can't believe you're going to sit in that. Like, you just made it and you're going to sit in it. Like I should be unsafe or something. So I get down there and I sit in it and it breaks. And I was really upset. And I come up.
When she comes back up from the lake and we're on the porch, and she shows that the thing has broken, and like, oh, what a bummer. And why not, we could just I'll get a board, we'll drill the holes through, no problem. And she was like, basically like, there was no having a conversation about this, and was like, basically like, forget this, we're just going to buy one. And I was like, whoa, you just invested so much of yourself into this, and it's awesome. And I'll just get no, it would be too hard to drill holes. I'm like, you just spent 2 days doing everything, too hard to drill holes. You'd have to measure it. I mean, things that just seemed completely irrational to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump in because it's a great example. Like, it's a great thing to work with, that kind of experience, because you're describing this sort of flash of energy that's loaded.
Yeah.
And so what I would say, if you are willing, is, well, let's go through the emotions list, which I can pull back up. And so we're going to ignore anger, and then just walk down, maybe start at the bottom and go up like we were before. And in this thing you've described, how is love involved?
Well, I mean, I loved, I was trying to recreate a love for the hammock a little bit. and my love of my family to get the hammock up there and to do that.
Yeah. Fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, like I just did not want, I at that point I felt so, I mean, I was feeling much more shame and sadness.
But we're going to get there.
Okay.
So envy and jealousy, was there any, in this experience, any envy or jealousy that you could identify? That you were talking about kind of the other generation kind of coming in.
Yeah.
So that Jenny's mother was having thoughts or criticism or whatever. And sometimes that can elicit some envy or jealousy. Like, I'm not getting the good stuff. You know, would she say this to Jenny? Or, you know, that kind of thing. That might enter into a situation like this.
I was definitely feeling some of that with Jenny's mom there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so that your initial check-in was like, no envy or jealousy. So it could be that would be one of the vulnerable emotions that got put in there in the reaction, you know, the rejecting kind of feeling or stuff.
Yeah.
So then what about joy?
Well, when I first finished it, it looked really pretty, and I there's a lot of strings that have to be connected to make it work, and I wasn't even sure I could do it, and I was pretty excited and felt some joy that I'd done it and that it looked like it was going to work.
Yeah.
Nice. And what about pain and sadness?
When I fell, I felt a lot of pain and sadness when it collapsed under me.
Did you get hurt a little physically?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I hurt my hip a little bit, and it was embarrassing, and the pain of embarrassment.
Yeah. Any loneliness in that whole situation?
Well, I was down there by myself and nobody saw me fall. And there's always that, like, you know, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. Like nobody, just felt like I was kind of glad nobody saw it at the same time, but I also was like, if I'd really gotten hurt, if I'd fallen in a lake or something, I could have really hurt myself and nobody was there, and that felt kind of lonely.
And what about guilt?
Yeah, I mean, like, who was I to try this thing that everybody said I couldn't do anyway? And like, I felt guilty. Well, it's more shame, but
Toxic shame, yeah. Anything that happened in the experience that would have been?
Oh, yeah, I guess I felt guilty that when Jenny was just trying to be helpful and fix it, and that annoyed me. But I, you know, days later, I felt some guilt about my reaction and my shame, but
so not
right away.
Aware of the guilt right in the moment, it could actually feed back into the hot potato. Like you could be starting to throw guilt on other people in that way.
Yeah.
And then shame, there's healthy shame, and then the toxic shame. Yeah, you described that already. Was there any fear?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I was afraid that I'd really hurt myself at the moment that we had the conversation on the lawn and we were talking about how to fix it. I was like, I had just fallen and I just didn't feel right, and I just didn't want to. So there was a little fear there, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was
and fear of just being, I don't know, like incapable of fixing it, or like, I don't know, not ever getting it right. Like when she was suggesting other solutions, I just didn't want to fall in it again. I was afraid of that happening again, even if we made a new board for it.
That sounds like a combination actually of that toxic shame, like I can't do it, I can't, you know, it's not that, and the actual legitimate fear, wise fear, like I don't want to follow you. Yeah. So having gone through all of those, does the anger feel any different as you think about this experience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it, I think I feel more, for me, I feel more sadness about it than than anger now. But I'm curious to you because I know, yeah, I know it was hard on you too.
Well, and that would be like a whole, I mean, I don't mean to
That's a
interrupt
whole
your
different
interaction, but that would be a whole other process for you, because you initially were saying, I don't do hot potato. I mean, I don't think I do that. And that you may now begin to see how there are ways that you would do that, but it would just show up quietly, like more. I know, Keith, you wouldn't you say that we've over the years kind of learned the different ways we do our hot potato rage?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't call it that so much because.
You like to call it that.
Yeah, I do. It's my little gimmick.
Oh, I like it.
It's annoying for a spouse though if you have a gimmick. Like I'm going to teach you my gimmick, and
Oh, you're showing that's hot potato rage. No, it's not.
He really likes to point out mine. I taught it to Everett, and he actually was really helpful in my relationship with him, because when he was growing up, early on, I taught it to him. I would be in a hot potato rage, and he would say, "Mom, do you think you might be doing that hot potato rage?" And I'd be like, "Why, yes, I am. No, I do. Thank you very much." Yeah.
Now it's worse.
Yeah.
You smart aleck kid.
It was useful. Yeah.
Last night the apartment was getting really warm, and we had the air conditioners cranked, and I go into the kitchen and I realize Jane's left the door open, and heat's billowing in from the laundry area that's totally hot, and I say really in a boisterous voice, "Jane, you left the door open. It's heat's pouring in," or something very shaming.
Mm.
And so I'm just thinking of that's a place where I've learned to kind of let the door open for my anger, and so that would be a place where I could use an example of what it's like for me when the anger wells up. I was definitely shaming Jane, but some of it is thinking, I know Jane well enough to think that she's an ecologist and would be careful with use of energy, and not just letting energy flow off into the world without a good reason. So there's that sort of.
Were you feeling any love in that moment?
Probably not very much.
How about envy or jealousy?
When
Oh,
Jane
wait. I just remembered something Jane did before, but like I can imagine feeling some love for the environment, right? Because you were concerned about the environment. So you might, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's accurate.
How about envy and jealousy?
Envy and jealousy. It sort of feels like I have these rules about needing to be an ecologist and conserve and stuff in my head, where I feel like I want to follow these things, and I want to be able to forget about those voices in my head about ecology sometimes, and just I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I can imagine as well. A sense of being jealous of or envious of her ability to be carefree and forgetful on occasion.
And then pain and sadness.
Pain and sadness. Where was that? That was I guess that's part of it. The sense of realizing that I have to let go that Jane feels the same way about ecology as I do. That sometimes she's going to not follow those kinds of things.
And that would feed into loneliness.
Yeah. What else? Yeah, feeling like she's not on board with the same values and ideas.
So how does that make you feel though?
But
Right,
that
'cause-
makes me feel lonely, I guess. That would be
okay.
some isolation kind of a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there's guilt because I feel like I'm responsible for stuff that Jane does, and I'm trying to hold on to this stuff that feels important to me, and she's not, and it's going out the door, literally.
But also, like, if you're not living close to your values, right? If one of our values as Unitarian Universalists too is to care for our earth, you know, the interdependent web of which we are a part. And so when you're not
Yeah.
living close to that, and it feels there's a disconnect, it definitely feels, I feel guilty
Mhm.
Yep, that makes sense.
when I don't recycle and things like that.
I guess the shame would be that I didn't catch it sooner, or something like that, that, you know, here I'm supposed to be in control of things like this, and I didn't catch it, you know. It was like, how long was it opened? What was going on?
Right.
Things like that. And I
Fear.
guess the humility part of that
Mm.
is letting go of having to be perfect. Feeling like I have to be aware of that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, the balance between shame and toxic shame too, like that. Where does healthy shame slide into toxic shame, and how do we mediate that? Like, how do we, sometimes when we're talking about emotions, we use I feel, and we say a thought. It's a really common thing, and teasing out what the story I'm telling myself is
From the
that
emotion.
results in the feeling can be a really freeing process. So something that you said, Keith, was I feel like I should be in charge of this, and that really is more of a thought than a feeling. Like, I'm thinking I'm responsible for this, which
Mhm.
results in this feeling of shame and guilt. And
Yeah, that's interesting.
and what about fear?
Fear, I guess I'm a little fearful that Jane's gone off the deep end and she doesn't care about ecology anymore.
Yeah, and that, I assume, I mean, it sounds to me like that would tap into a deeper fear. Like, you know, is this woman the same woman I fell in love with and married and decided to share a life with? And has she changed, you know, in a fundamental way that's going to make it difficult? And those are really deep-seated fears.
Yeah. The last thing is, do you still feel the same anger?
Yeah, right.
No, I don't.
Isn't it interesting?
Uh-huh.
Like how you make space for all the feelings and then it transforms. Then the anger that's left is more just anger or nothing.
It's like I understand, you know, that you would have just forgotten about it or not thought about it in a moment, and you know, gone to check the laundry and come back in and walk by the door and it stayed open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a really good one for me to hear, because I sometimes lump a bunch of things together and make it seem like this is something that is always this way, when really it's just this one thing and not the whole, you know, kit and caboodle of evidence that I've put together of how something's, you know, how she doesn't care about the same things I do.
Or you.
Or me.
Are there suggestions? So like if Keith, we'll use that situation, had gone through the whole thing, right? Recognized what other emotions were at play. So he actually learned a lot more about himself and what's happening for him in a particular situation, which is great. And you get to the end and you're at the anger and he says, yeah, and I'm angry because Jane and I agreed that this is a rule for us and she didn't follow it. How Keith started the story by saying, and then I said blah, 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 which was really shaming. So is there not, is there a non-shaming way to express anger? Like,
What
I mean,
great question.
Like,
What a
it's
great-
okay to be angry, right?
So that would be an interesting question for you, Keith. Is there a way, like the do-over? That's this thing we've been working at this year. Is like, can we do it a do-over? And so, having sorted that out, is there a way that you, if there is still any anger left, that you might communicate that to me, like in a do-over?
Yeah, I could say to you, after processing it, I could say, Jane, you left the kitchen door open. There's heat coming in, and I just wanted to make you aware that that was the case.
Yeah, and the anger part might include also something like, that really bothers me. Like, I want to have an agreement that we're going to make a plan together around this. Can you agree with me? Like, it's, and it doesn't mean that he'd be trying to shame me or control me. It would be, it matters to me. Like, it's about setting a boundary or fighting for a cause or creating something new. That the passion part, if we let that go too much, then we don't create new things. Like, we don't come to a new place.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's a good question. And that speaks to what you guys were talking about. Like, Raleigh, you were saying you get into feeling so guilty that you back off the thing you felt angry about. And it's hard to sort that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks. This might be really helpful for us.
That's
I'm
awesome.
quite certain it will be.
The closing words begin with a quote from Philip Moffat in Dharma Wisdom. In the Theravada Buddhism tradition, it's taught that the antidote to anger is loving kindness and compassion. But because you sometimes get swept away by anger, you forget your intention to respond with loving kindness and compassion. Today, you have learned to increase your curiosity when you are getting swept away by your anger. I invite you to remember to wonder about hot potato rage. Be curious. Make space for all of your emotions. Talk with others if that helps you to sort them out. And then you will begin to discover the gifts of the emotions. Above all, remember to practice loving kindness and compassion for yourselves and others as we all endeavor to do our best. Truly, and thank you.